All right, so look, I know this is going to feel controversial at first because I want to talk to you today about misinformation in the American political system. And before you fire off a message to me and tell me which side you're on and which side's right and which side's wrong, that's not what this is about. I want to talk to you about interference, political interference and misinformation from foreign actors intruding in our 2024 election. And this is not about Russia, Russia, Russia. So, hey, I don't care if you're full on MAGA. I don't care if you're full on Harris and Walls. Whatever your political orientation is, that is not what this is about. So let's dig in. Democracy is fragile. It's imperfect. But by its very nature, it's also quite beautiful. However, because each of our voices matter, and each of our voices matter, our opinions drive both of those things. And it's very difficult in a democratic society to unify voices, to unify visions, to all believe the same way. Don't believe me? Sit down at the Thanksgiving table and raise something political. Talk about inflation, talk about immigration, talk about these kitchen table and or hotbed issues. And you'll find a variety of opinions. And that is what has fueled the success of the United States, is embracing the differences, but finding unifying factors between us. And that is what is most important in our democratic system, is to protect and to encourage and to nourish those differing opinions. But I'll tell you where my concern comes in. It comes in when not within this country does dissension exist, but with bad actors across the world who have a vested interest in seeing our democratic system fail. Get involved in that conversation, try to influence that conversation. And that is clearly and definitely what's happening with the country of Iran. Now, all this being said, have we been blameless? Have we been flawless as a country? I'm not going to take up that argument. You can look at what happened in Iran and the deposing the Shah. You can look at our involvement in other countries. Let's set all those things aside for a moment. I don't think any country has clean hands, with the exception of maybe Switzerland, who tends to stay neutral. But this is not a conversation about that. Regardless of what we may have done as a country in the past, and regardless of how you feel about it, the reality is countries are taking a retaliatory stance towards the United States and towards the election. And I think it's just important to be aware of where those influences are occurring, how to recognize them, and the implications they can have on each of our independent and free choices that we make and opinions and how those are informed. So here's what I'm specifically talking about. Microsoft, in its recent threat intelligence report release, has identified multiple sites being driven by Iranian interests, no disrespect meant, the Iranian interests to influence the US elections on both sides of the equation. As an example, there's a site, and it's a Democrat-leaning site called Neothink. Neothink is publishing long-winded articles, plagiarizing content that's already out there in our US-based media and expanding on it with a very, very negative bent against Trump, calling him a, I want to quote this specifically, an opioid-pilled elephant, creating cartoons of him, really sowing dissent on the Democratic side. But that's not exclusive, because on the Republican side, there are sites, for instance, one that's called the Savannah Times, that appears to be centered in local government and local issues and local community conversations, but is taking up gender reassignment, LGBTQ kinds of topics, Republican speaking points and topics, and really weaponizing that. And what's their long-term goal, right? Their long-term goal is to create division through the parties, to sow that division, to create such dissension in the United States that the very thing that makes us so valuable, so respected across the world, and that's our ability to unify in things that really matter to all of us, to find common ground between all of us, despite our differences, to understand what we share in common and have that common vision, common voice, and find those unifying factors. The more seeds of dissension are sown, the more separatist our society becomes, the more fraction we become, and therefore the power of our collective decision making in our votes, in our policies, in our Senate, in the House, even in the presidency, becomes compromised as well. On one side of this equation, in 2020, groups tied to the Iranian government infiltrated Proud Boys accounts and really tried to weaponize their messaging in the 2020 election. Now in 2024, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard has been tied to spearphishing attempts to infiltrate the Harris campaign's email accounts in order to compromise them and send messaging from them. So look, this is why we're having this conversation. I don't care which side of the political spectrum you're on. I respect all informed opinions. And as a side note, I like you to have done your research. I like you to have triangulated your opinions. I like you to get outside of that confirmation bubble that every human being tends to live within. Look at differing opinions, entertain them. Narrow down for yourself what the facts are. But be very, very careful, because outside influences are joining this conversation in an attempt to influence what we do as a democratic society. And that, my friends, can never stand. So I hope that you got something from this. I hope you start to think about that next Facebook message or community message or news source that you've listened to for a long time because it resonates with you, it aligns with your thinking. And just check and see and make sure that it's originating from like-minded persons within this country who share our collective experience, and not some outside hacker who's instead trying to leverage and weaponize the differences that are inherent in a democratic society. So thank you for joining me on this episode on misinformation. My name is Philip Macko. I am a 5-time published author, host of the Muddy Waters YouTube series and podcast. Please, I want to entertain comments. If you wildly disagree with me, don't be afraid to say so. If you love what I've said, don't be afraid to say so as well. Click the thumbs up. I hope you will. I hope you'll subscribe, and I hope you'll tune in to future episodes. Have an awesome weekend.